Right, so speaking of social media, I have put the slides that I'm presenting today into the university repository, and also accompanying those slides is in the repository is a Word document that lists all the tweets I'm tweeting as I speak today, because not everybody uses Twitter, so that way you can go to the tweet deck and in the repository and get the links. So the idea being that you can just listen, because I do speak fairly quickly, and not have to frantically try and take notes. Okay, so what I'm talking about today is about why science needs to be above criticism and how good data management fits into that broader agenda. So on a personal note, I'd just like to say that in 1976 I lived in the Netherlands, and as an Australian child this was magic to come and live here in De Winkelo, which is very close to a radio astronomy dish, which is what my father used to do, and it was a bit of a shock to me, I am a complete idiot, to realise that actually there are beaches in the Netherlands. Because I lived in the middle, and so when I came this time, I, oh, of course it's on the sea. Anyway, I just thought I'd let you know. My wonderful sense of direction. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today is the issue about how living in a post-truth world affects credibility of science. And tying into that are problems we have with reproducibility and replicability of scientific experiments, and how open science can provide a solution to this problem. And then the problems of implementing open science. It's a nice idea, but how do you go about making it happen? And then what institutions, or some institutions, are doing along those lines. So the first thing, and because I've timed my tweets rather oddly, I hope it does work, this tweet's already gone out. I'm going to be referring to this book, which is a series of essays written by a sociologist of science in the 1940s, and he talked about how science works as an entity, as a thing. And the material I'm referring to is a particular essay he wrote called The Normative Structure of Science. It was written in 1942, which was obviously right in the middle of the Second World War, and it's quite incredible that he was writing like that at a time like that. So 77 years ago he was talking about incipient and actual attacks upon the integrity of science has led scientists to recognise a dependence on particular types of social structure. So it was the realisation that science needed to actually have some self-awareness. We'll come back to this quote. So, what's been going on in the last few years? Well, a couple of years ago we had that joyous thing called Brexit, and at the time Michael Gove, who's still in government, had made a comment that Britain has had enough of experts. He was talking about economists, but nonetheless it's this experts. We don't need experts. Just recently an article came out in March, and Scott Pruitt, who's the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, said that he alone will decide what is and isn't acceptable science to be covered. He's a lawyer. Stephen Hawking, who of course passed away not long ago, but when he was around he was talking about the National Health Service in the UK and how it kept him alive basically, and he, in this interview, talked about how he was very cross about the way politicians were using cherry-picking results to serve their means. So he was saying that cherry-picking evidence is unacceptable. Public figures, when they abuse scientific argument and cite some studies but not others to justify policies they want to implement for other reasons, debases scientific culture. This is the world we're living in. People are increasingly in smaller and smaller bubbles. They're working in their own echo chambers. They're not taking notice of a bigger picture. Broadcasting, mass media is becoming less and less relevant as people further narrow themselves down into their own environments and just follow and listen to the people who say what they want to hear. And this is very, very difficult for us in a scientific environment to say, actually, that's wrong. And it's even more important when we think about the issue about credibility and criticism. So we have to be above criticism, because otherwise it completely undermines what little credibility we have left. So let's go back to this quote. Incipient and actual attacks upon the integrity of science, that's happening, means an institution under attack must re-examine its foundations, restate its objectives and seek out its rationale. And I think really, even though this was all those years ago, now is the same, we're in the same position. And open science is the thing that is seeking out the rationale for research now, for us to make ourselves above criticism, because there is plenty of it. Most of you probably have heard of the term reproducibility, or the almost impossible to pronounce replicability. Got it right? The problem is, if studies can't be replicated, then it undermines the entire basis of what science is supposed to be about. I'm successful because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. The idea is that science is iterative, that it works with what has gone before, it repeats what's gone before and adds on to it. There's this idea that it keeps scooping forward. And if you find something's wrong, you say, that's wrong, and that idea gets pushed to one side and the new idea comes in. So if this system is not working, if you cannot replicate what has gone before, then the whole basis of what we claim science to be, that it's objective and that it is truth, is actually undermined. So this was a study that was published in 2005, I think, and he didn't go around and look at a whole lot of studies and replicate them and say, that's the wrong result. What this author did was he said, what are the conditions under which a study would be most likely to have credible results? In terms of the study size, whether or not there was use of blind controls, those sorts of conditions of a study. And he came up with a sort of a kind of rubric of what would be a good study and a fairly robust study, and then compared that to the methodology of quite a large number of studies, and found out that not the results, the methodology of those studies did not hold up to this level of scrutiny, of sort of robustness, and made the conclusion that therefore you could pretty much guess that most published research findings are false. It doesn't mean they all are, but it does mean that we are perhaps holding on to something that isn't actually real. This, however, is a different thing. This is a study where they did try and reproduce research. So it was this group have done a few of these. In this case, it was psychology journals, and they looked at 100 different studies of psychology that were published in some psychology journals, and asked research groups to replicate the study and see if they got similar results. Now, what happened was there was a very big difference between the results that were claimed in the first round, the ones that were published originally, and what happened in the second replication. So in the original studies, the ones that were published, 97% of them had significant results. But when it was replicated, it was only 36% that had significant results. Now, psychology is obviously, it's a difficult one, and I think it's a research area that struggles a bit in this area of reproducibility. So this is probably down the extreme end. But this sort of thing really, really does not help us in our credibility argument. And the reason why it's happening is because of the reward system in science. So the only thing that counts currently in science is publication of novel results in high-impact journals. And there are two problems there. One is the novel results, and the other is the high-impact journals. Right? The novel results bit is the 97%. The sort of things that potentially go on with studies is we might ignore that particular one, we might choose that result, we might just repeat this experiment to try and encourage that outcome. Those sorts of things can go on all the time to create the novel results. And the reason why people are doing that is because they have to get into the high-impact journals, and the high-impact journals are the ones who can pick and choose and say, that's not novel enough because I'm really running a news service, so I need to have a scoop as the editor of my journal. So I'm going to go for the most novel. And it's not surprising in some ways that science and nature, who obviously have the very highest impact factors of all, have also very close to the highest retraction rates of papers, because they are jumping and grabbing at the novel results, which sometimes cannot be replicated. So this research integrity, reproducibility issue is being taken very seriously at the very highest level. So in December last year, oh no, this is the UK, it has been running since last year, the Research Integrity Inquiry. It was sort of shut down for a short period during, we had a general election, we seem to have them every 5 minutes in the UK, last year, and it's come back to life, and they're now doing oral evidence. It's ongoing, so presumably there will be some sort of report towards the end of this year. And in the US, it's very early days. In December 2017, the first meeting happened of the Committee of Reproducibility and Replicability in Science. So very, very big, big sort of eyes looking at this particular issue. So a couple of years ago, in 2016, Nature ran a survey of our research community. 1,500 researchers responded, asking, is there a reproducibility crisis? And we've got 52% say, yes, there's a significant crisis, and 38% saying there's a slight crisis, which is a bit like saying you're a little bit pregnant. There is no such thing as a slight crisis, but, you know, it's semantics. That would take us up to 90% of researchers agreeing that there is some kind of replicability crisis going on. Interestingly, with that study, the ones who said that they felt that there was a crisis still felt that they were able to trust the work of their colleagues. So I'm not quite sure how that works. So yes, they're understanding there's a problem, but I must say they must feel that it doesn't actually affect them directly. However, this is quite interesting. This has just been published only about a month ago, or 2 months ago. It's an opinion piece, but it was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And what this woman's done, and I like it because it's spelt the same way as my first name, so clearly she must be great, but she was actually looking, have there been an increase in the number of retractions, and have there been an increase of what could be seen as markers of this replicability crisis? And she's arguing, no, there hasn't. So therefore, it's a narrative that's actually not correct. So whether it is or not, nonetheless, it is there. We've got big government studies looking at this. It's quite public. So, in effect, science is being brought into question in a public way. So our solution is, instead of only having one red in relation to what matters, we have all of them open. So we say all of the different stages of the research process should in themselves be a research output, something that you can pin your name to, that can be cited, that can be used in the reward and assessment process, instead of concentrating it all into one area, which obviously opens up to potentially effectively corruption. I mean, that's a strong word, but you understand what I mean. The problem is we talk about open science or open research or open scholarship. But what do we mean? There are so many definitions of open science that now there's actually a definition of the definitions, which is this document here, to try and understand what are we talking about when we talk about open science. There's also currently about 90 declarations and positions in this area of open science around the world. This is a document that is collecting them as they come up. A lot of them you would be familiar with. The fair data principles, for example, are on this list, which have already been referred to. There's the Declaration on Data Citation Principles. These are things that are now becoming fairly commonplace for those people who work in this area, the Hague Declaration and so on. But almost all of them actually come back to Merton, the guy I talked about at the beginning, the normative structure of science. So in 1942, he said, this defines science. This is how science works. We have four norms. Universalism, that the science is independent of the person or institution that is producing it, that the outcomes do not relate to that body, that should be free of that sort of effectively being affected by where it's come from, and it should be taken on face value. The second one's called communalism. It was communism, but obviously it was wartime and so on. Communism was a bit of a bad word after the war. It got changed to communalism. It means that the sort of essence that communism means, though, however, that it's a common ownership. We should all own scientific goods together. Now, this was before. The big push of commercial publishers happened post-war. So the idea of having research hidden behind expensive paywalls didn't occur until after this was put together. Disinterestedness, that's different to uninterestedness. If you are uninterested in something, you couldn't care less about it. If you are disinterested in something, it means you don't have a stake in it. So you are not working for the pharmacy company that's creating the drug that you're providing very positive results for. And organised scepticism. The term peer review didn't come into the lexicon until in the 1970s. So organised scepticism, what he's talking about is that somebody else who kind of knows something about this area has a look at it and says, I think that's wrong, or yep, that's fair enough. He's talking about peer review. So the idea is that scientific validity is valid regardless of where you come from, that everybody should have access to it, that it should be peer reviewed, and it should not be biased in relation to whatever your personal situation is. And that pretty much is what is behind almost all of those scientific principles related to open science, open research, open scholarship. So open data is a core principle of open scholarship. So we've got in the middle here, you probably can't see, but in the middle here, we've got 3 rings. One is open scholarly communication, one's open access to publication, and one's open research data. And that's what we're talking about today here at this conference. This was just published, and it's talking about the irreproducibility crisis of modern science. So whether or not it's true, it's certainly being talked about in those terms. But one of the recommendations of this report that was just released, I think in April, is talking about data handling. And he's specifically saying the researchers' data available for public inspection after publication of their results. That's what we call open data, sharing data. And also talking about experimenting with born open data, which of course is opening up a whole new area of research. Make your data available and suddenly whole areas of research become open. Genomics came about after the Genome Project made all of this material openly available. There was a whole disciplines that opened up simply because data was suddenly made available. So let's just talk about implementing open science. So this is a photograph I took in Australia, walking on a sort of quite a big, still a steep hill, and it was telling us to wear sensible shoes. So the problem I've got, and the reason why that photograph is there, is because institutions of all of the stakeholders in this game, the funders and the publishers and the governments, researchers themselves, institutions are the most conservative. They are the least likely to want to change, and they are the most resistant. And the problem is we really need them to play along. So here are a couple of sort of commentary pieces in the last couple of years. When the Royal Society wrote in 2012 that institutions and universities should play a major role in supporting open data culture. So that was June 2012. That's what, 6 years ago? So we're still sort of waiting for that to happen, at some places anyway. So one of the reasons why there's resistance is because the way institutions work. Generally, the people running institutions have been around for a while. They started their research journey some years ago. They're more mature. They made decisions about the way they were going to work at the beginning of their research. This is how everybody does it. All the young people in the room, in 15 years' time, somebody younger than you will go, you are really old-fashioned, your ideas are really out of date, why do you do it this way? If right now you might be working in a really cutting-edge manner. So it's quite normal. But the comment being that science has really, particularly in the last 20 years, changed dramatically, and the way we do science has changed dramatically. There's no such thing as e-research. Even in Cambridge University Library, which is about the most sort of traditional place you can go, I very, very rarely see somebody not working with a computer. So the idea of somebody doing their research by looking at and of course there are a couple, looking at a book and writing on little cards and holding those cards and sorting them out and then handwriting their essays doesn't exist anymore. E-research is just research. The E is redundant now. And these things have changed so profoundly that it's actually quite difficult for people who are in senior positions, some of whom are no longer researching actively, to understand what's going on. And so the young postdocs are really engaged in this and want change, but they're arguing with PIs and with people who are in very, very high administrative roles within the university who don't understand what they're talking about. The thing is, open can mean success. So this happened last year, January last year. $20 million was Canadian dollars was given to McGill University's hospital to have a completely open research program. So the Tannenbaum family donated the money, so it's called the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute. But that's the kind of good news that you want to be passing on to the people who are high. They love hearing about lots of money flowing in their direction. So that's a good news story. So this was a call to arms. This was a very senior who's working in a research institution in September last year. he was saying, he said that in this area of reward and assessment, the people who need to stand up is leadership in research institutions. And the thing he's saying is we need to change how we appoint and promote our faculty members. So he's pointing out that we need to open up. The big circle needs to have lots of red dots, and not just one. We need to think about rewarding openness. Now, so for those of you who have been involved in working with data and working with research community on helping them manage data, and Alistair referred to this about, a lot of researchers who don't look after their data properly. It's probably in a drawer. Some of it will be on a USB stick. I think I left some at my Auntie Joan's house when I was over there. So it's problematic when you're talking to your research community about opening up your data. And the important thing to remember is we need to start at the beginning of the research process, not halfway through or at the end when you have to go over to Auntie May's house and pick it up. So it's about getting things right from the beginning. Now that's quite a hard sell because it's not it's a concept, and there's an implied deficit on behalf of the research community when you start talking about this. You're saying you're not doing it right and I need to help you and show you how to do it. And then they say, well, what do you know? You're not a researcher. And you go, actually quite a lot, because I do a lot of work in this area. So how about we just start talking? Okay, it's an awkward conversation. Some institutions are standing up. There are some good examples. The LERU paper, LERU being the League of European Research Universities, they have published, they've put forward a paper on open science that went to the Rectors' Assembly last weekend. It has been approved, which is fantastic. It will be going online on the 29th of May, and there will be a launch event on the 12th of June. So this is fantastic. And what it has in it is a roadmap for universities on the basis of 8 dimensions of open science, talking about different specific things that universities can do. Of course, TU Delft is one of the leaders in this area, including open data and open science in the strategic framework coming forward from 2018 to 2024. So this is fantastic. Including it at the highest levels, putting it up in the policy of the institution means that there's always something to refer to. There are some other areas which are starting out. In the UK, King's College London do have an open research group, and they've got a terms of reference, and they're talking about raising awareness and encouraging engagement and championing good open research practice and so on. Sussex University have support to develop a position statement about open research. They're not 100% sure about how to go about that. University of Reading have published a vision statement on open research and have also put together a consultation, and that was quite interesting. They based this on a successful open research conference they held in March 2017, and they pulled together the vision statement, the initial sort of draft of it, with the idea it was philosophical oversight, that the open access policy and the research data management policy that already existed anyway kind of pulled it together philosophically. However, when they went to their to sort of test drive it, they were going to just announce it. And then they thought, let's test drive it with some of our research community, and they got a lot of negative pushback. And what they realised was some of the language was confusing, that people didn't understand a lot of the terms that were being used, and also that there was concern amongst the community that this suddenly meant something extra they had to do. So they changed the language and then they sent it out for consultation. So that consultation has just finished. It had a very low return rate, according to my colleague at Reading, but they will be pulling together a report based on that. Now that conversation I had with him was very helpful for me because we at Cambridge, and I'm just about to talk about that, are also running a consultation on open science, and I was interested in the language question. So this is a suggestion about the way we talk about openness, that it actually, there's 3 areas: open content, open development, and open infrastructure. And in our consultation, we just talked about 2 of them. Content refers to stuff people know about, open access to publications, open data, open educational resources, open bibliography, and open source software. Most people will have heard of at least 1 or 2 of those. It's not completely foreign. The idea of open infrastructure, like open standards and open systems, will probably resonate more with people who are more technologically based. But it was these areas, the open development, that Reading had issues with. Some people thought open peer review was the comments section on the BBC website after a news article, and, oh, well, that's not appropriate for science, which is true. But that's not what it is. So we avoided that completely. We kept those out of the discussion. So our consultation closed on the 21st of May, but, I'll get to this in a minute, we've had over 300 individual responses. So I'm in the process literally now of going through those responses. But this is our breakdown by school, and this is the but. It turns out 2 of our schools, which is School of Physical Science, is only quite small, 6.16, and also School of where's Technology? School of Technology down here is only 4.35. We're a bit concerned. It's very hard to communicate anything in Cambridge. It's an entirely devolved place. You cannot send an all-staff email. They do not exist. You cannot even send an all-school email or an email to all communication officers. These opportunities do not exist. You basically have to get a sign writer to write something in the sky with a plane to try and get everybody's attention. It's impossible. So we're pretty sure that we need to do a secondary push to try and get our School of Technology and School of Physical Sciences, who we think probably would be quite interested and engaged, give them a second chance. So we're going to leave it open for another week and a half. So we may well end up with more responses by the end. But to give an idea of where we're up to now, we've had quite a good range of people. So this is professor running through down to postdoc being the most engaged, not surprisingly. No undergraduates, also not surprisingly. But I'm really pleased that we have had a wide range of different levels from the university. And one of the questions we asked was, do you consider yourself to be knowledgeable about the area of open research? And would you like to be? And what we had was, yes, the top one is I do consider myself to be knowledgeable. I consider myself interested but not knowledgeable, which is the most of them. And then I don't know much but I'd like to know more, and I don't know much and I don't care. Now, this is kind of self-selecting, isn't it? I mean, if you're not interested and you don't know anything about it, the likelihood is you're probably not going to do the survey, so this is not unexpected. But I do find, where am I going? I do find this to be quite encouraging, that we've got a lot of people who are kind of interested and want to know more. I think that's who we want to grab and engage with. So, in summary, we've got a problem in terms of the credibility of science in this post-truth world, and that's just it is the reality we're dealing with. So we need to take it, face it, and deal with it. And so while reproducibility issues are gaining considerable attention, we need to work out ways of countering those, and I would suggest open science offering a solution. Data management, of course, is a big part of that solution, but we do know implementing open science is challenging, and I think the institutions that are taking action are to be applauded and to sort of show the way for the others. And this is just one last slide that is also a complete aside to what I've been talking about, relates directly though to the whole open science agenda. What this is a map of the research process running from research question through to analysing data and writing it up and so on and so forth, distribution, dissemination, networking, finding academic employment. All of these logos are all companies that have been bought by Elsevier and have kept all of their logos, so it's not necessarily obvious that they've been bought by Elsevier. So now Elsevier has an entire ecosystem that you as a researcher, knowingly or otherwise, can fall into and be trapped in. Now this is potentially problematic because it's proprietary, it's also very expensive. So open science doesn't just deal with the credibility problem, it potentially deals with this problem about the sort of co-opting of the scientific endeavour. So that's just something to take home and think about. And I think that's it. So I'll just leave that there. I've also put those on the Twitter feed, which are other talks and things on this topic of open science. But that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Danny. That was a fascinating introduction. I will start with my own question. Can you go back to the slide before? Now, I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Okay.
I'm a researcher. I am very busy.
Yes.
Writing lots of grant proposals. I'm told everywhere I have to do grant proposals. I have to do teaching. I have to work with PhDs. I have to get more students in. And now you're telling me I need to be open and do all my data. And now you're telling me I can't work with these great interfaces that make my life easier. I don't want to work with you.
Yes, I know. I know. And this is why institutions need to step up. Because what we need is really good contra infrastructure. So this points to the infrastructure problem that we have. So a lot of people say, what's the point of making my article open access in an institutional repository? No one's ever going to find it. Or when I look around the institutional repository, it's a whole lot of crap. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. maybe it is, maybe it isn't. That is fair enough, because what you want to do is you want to go, I want to go to Journal of my specialty and find out some interesting stuff in my specialty. And I don't want to go logging around your institutional repository and then your institutional repository, or I don't have time. So the overlay infrastructure that starts pulling this material together in a way that's meaningful to you as a researcher is really important. And having things like DOIs that then can link the data that underpins your research to the paper, then using things like altmetrics or other ways of tracking social media and so on. Those sorts of things are really important infrastructure. So we need to create, they exist, we just need to create an alternative version. There's nothing individually wrong with any of these products. They're actually all quite good products, they work well, that's why Elsevier bought them. But the trick is to not get completely sucked into the ecosystem. That's what I'm sort of warning people about.
Okay, good. I have a first question here from Yasmin, and look what we have, everyone. One of these to throw around to answer questions. So, go on, Yasmin, catch this. Hey.
So, first of all, it was a really nice and inspiring talk. Thank you very much. And I will shortly introduce myself. So, I'm one of the data stewards at TU Delft. And we are now working with researchers, so how we can make their data as open as possible and as close as necessary, so more fair, and we are providing quite some dedicated support with helping them to fill their data management plans, but the idea is not just to fill the form, but to really bring it into daily practice, so achieve the cultural change, right? So about the reproducibility crisis, I think indeed researchers have a lot of responsibility there, I completely agree, but I would say we are also keeping our promise, right, with the data management plans, so indeed the funders have to also start rewarding the researchers, and that should be that they don't only look for, indeed, as you also stated, with the novel publications in high impact journals, but also with the publication of the data sets, so that people could also put those into their records, and that's also being a reward system. And I also completely agree with your point that the institution has to step up, because indeed this slide that you now showed, that shows that the publishers are so strong, this shouldn't be the way it is. And the publishers also, we should indeed step up and say the publishers, you also have to take steps here. So
the Wellcome Trust...
And how to do that, indeed, that's my question.
So I think you're right about the funders, because they have the money and people respond to money. So the Wellcome Trust is actually doing its first review of its open access policy since 2005 at the moment, and there was an evidence gathering session on Tuesday this week, which I attended, and they asked the publishers to attend, journal publishers, book publishers, institutions, the section I was in, and then funders. And it was quite interesting to be there. The publishers said very predictable, obviously pre-arranged, sort of party line, which is keep paying for hybrid open access, and otherwise it threatens author choice. So they all came out with exactly the same blurb. I think Wellcome Trust is more sophisticated than that. They have already started requiring the retention and sharing of things like reagents. So their understanding what data is quite broad. They also have recognised now, and NIH are doing this as well, start recognising preprints in grant applications, which means that recognising other forms of research output as being a valid way of sharing your research. So I think there is some movement there with the funders. There was quite a lot of discussion. It was interesting that it was under Chatham House rules, so I can't say too much about what was happening, but the conversation with other funders, a lot of them in the US, was looking at this broader issue about opening up things across the research life cycle, which made me feel quite hopeful, actually. Fingers crossed.
Okay, further questions. Irina.
Wow.
Yeah, good catch.
First of all, Danny, thank you for your wonderful, inspiring talk. My name is Irene Hasslinger, and I'm secretary to one of the faculties here at TU Delft. What I found particularly interesting is your remark about institutions needing to step up, and then there was something on your slide about governance inhibiting this. I was wondering, could you be a bit more explicit and elaborate on this remark?
So universities run in different ways, but they're not run like companies. In a company, the CEO or somebody who's in charge will make a decision, and that decision is the way it is. And if the CEO changes, then the decision holds until somebody else makes another decision. It is not the case in university environments. University environments run with things like committees. Those committees have got individuals on them. Quite often those individuals are there as an economist or as a chemist. They're not necessarily there as dean of something or provost chancellor of something. So the roles they hold, because what we have, to be perfectly frank, universities are run by a bunch of amateurs. I mean, they are, because you've got a bunch of people who are really good at biochemistry being asked to make decisions about which finance computing system we should be buying. They don't know anything about finance computing systems. They haven't necessarily had any management or finance training. So we do have a very strange environment in universities, and I think it's important that the research community is involved in decision making, because research is a kind of weird thing. It's not like a company, but it does mean that it's quite difficult with governance to actually make things happen. It's a lot of advocacy. It's a lot of convincing individual people and getting them on your side. It's like politics. You know, if we go for a spill, will you vote for me? And you go around and gather your numbers, and then you work out whether or not it's going to work. Or you might say, I know that person's really against this idea, but they've apologised for this meeting, so I'm going to bring it up at that meeting, see if I can push it through. You know, there's those sorts of games that kind of go on because it is a political environment. So I think that that's why it's quite difficult to sort of navigate a university environment. It's not cut and dry. It is subjective in a lot of places, and the people who are making decisions aren't necessarily highly knowledgeable. It's not uncommon for you to get into a room and people have not read the papers beforehand. They're flicking through as you're talking your piece. They haven't read them. If you don't provide one page that's got a picture on it with colours, they're not going to get the point. You know, so I mean, you know, let's be honest. So that's the challenge, I think, with institutions, is that actually the way it runs. Well, I think provide one page with coloured pictures on it. No, I'm quite serious. I really am quite serious. That is really powerful, all right? Something like that. If you try and explain, the ecosystem, blah, 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 they've gone to sleep. You go, that's Elsevier. How many of those products are you using? How much are you already in Elsevier's bed? This is how much we pay Elsevier every year. Are you happy with that arrangement? They are exploiting us. That's a way of sort of putting it. Trying to do the big argument and stuff, they've switched off. They're thinking about the next experiment.
So good, some good, very tweetable comments in there, I think. There's a question here, and the man in the grey.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a wonderful talk. I'm Jelle de Pla from Eswell Netherlands Institute for Space Research. About your kind of introduction, science is in a crisis, and there are groups in the general public that also have a mistrust not only against science but also the institutions. But the open data part, I think it's a necessary first step to get more open and regain that trust. But people have also mistrust of institutions, and the solution is going through institutions. So how do you think we should proceed after open data?
I think openness is really important because it provides the very base level. My life before I did my open access, my PhD in open access, I was a science communicator. So I went from science communication to scholarly communication. And I still hold a lot of the principles of science communication, which is effectively translation of research into understandable language. I'm very much one of the books I sometimes talk about is, which is one of my favourites, is Learn to Write Badly, How to Succeed in the Social Sciences. The kind of language that's used in academia to try and ring-fence a discipline is generally unnecessary. Certain jargon is important. In the medical environment, you need to know specifically what it is you're talking about. Jargon is necessary. I'm not saying it's not, but there are some environments where writing in a completely incomprehensible way has become the norm. That's not very open. Even if you make that open, nobody can understand it. So I do think there needs to, and this is where institutions can come in, about having a public engagement kind of level of work. And we struggle with our communications area because we say to them, if you're going to do a news story about a research piece, can you let us know so we can make sure the research is available in the repository? It's very simple, which they remember for a few months and then forget, and we have to remind them again. But I mean, that's just the basic bit about if you've got a news story, make sure the research behind it's open access. It's really having that layer of understandability because institutions are seen as impenetrable partly because the language is impenetrable. So if we stop that, if we provide a solution to that, then that will really help, I think.
Yeah, and that's a very valuable point. Open science by itself, it needs to be engaged, have public engagement to properly work. Okay, do we have some other questions? Nicoletta, just the board on the left. And let's start here. Let's start here with the guy in blue, and then we'll go to Nicoletta.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. Actually, my research subject is open data, but it is open government data. This movement also started about 10 years ago, and now it suffers a lot to keep it sustainable because utilization level is very low, and the governments started this idea with very high expectations, but now they see that they don't reach the high level of expectations. And open science data also has similar expectations, and I would like to get your opinion about how we can keep sustainability of open science data, because utilization level of open science data is very low. Mm-hmm. So if we see the reuse of the published open data, it's not something very high numbers. So how we can keep utilization level high, and how we can produce more reasonable and quantitative results of feasibility. Like if we publish data, we will get that kind of results. Thank you very much.
Okay, so that talks to a couple of things. One is the need for us to have, so we've got people who produce data, and then we've got people who curate the data, and we've also got sort of stewards which run sort of across the curation and also the advocacy side of things. But we need data scientists, people who work with data, to do stuff with it, and that's a skill set that is sort of still fairly new, and it really should be actually, I feel, as somebody who only vaguely codes, it should actually be something that is really taught to pretty much all of our undergraduates now. I mean, it's just a base skill. So the problem I think we have is a lack of people who are able to use the data. It's not a lack of will, it's a lack of ability. So that's one side of things, is skilling up our community. And the other side is to think about actually how available is it? Just because it's in a institutional repository doesn't mean it's particularly visible. So in Australia, the government invested about 10 years ago actually, it was a lot of money. It were two lots. The first lot was about $47 million, and the second lot wasn't quite as lot, but it was a lot of cash on the Australian National Data Service. And what they thought they were going to do was build the mother of all repositories for data, and then realised actually that was just impossible. So what they've done is they've built something called Research Data Australia, and that's like it's like a homepage for all data in Australia, open or otherwise. So you go and you say, I'm interested in pelagic fish, and so you look it up, and then there's 2,000 data sets, and you go, that one sounds kind of interesting, and it's got either a link to the actual data or a link to the people who've done the research, so you can contact them and work with them. So that's where it's all together. So that makes it much more findable. And this is a problem with the government data, is not having enough people doing it. Apps that show you where all the public toilets are, for example, or if I want to move to a new city, can I actually find out where the train stations are, where the local sort of childcare centre is, where the sort of health centre and so on is? Can I actually get that all into one place so that I can make decisions? That would all be based on government data, but somebody's got to build the app. And it's that sort of building that interface. Again, it's the same thing as the previous question, really. It's creating the interface to show relevance, to make it useful to the average person. And so that's not, it's a long-term answer. It's not, there's no quick wins there.
But not all data is going to be used a lot. We have one
that's true.
We have one data set here in the 4TU Centre which was disproves some Einsteinian theories about quantum mechanics, and it was a big article in Nature, but of course the data set is only actually understandable by 10, 15 other labs around the world, so it's only been downloaded 10 or 15 times. Doesn't mean the data is not valuable. So sometimes it's about usage and understanding. Okay, I think we have time for one last question. You okay with it? Okay, the guy in the blue here, and then we're going to pass over to Marta. Yeah, 6 out of 6 catches. Well done.
So I'm René Pelso from Danish National Infrastructure. So can I conclude that one of your, for me at least, main points was that one, on the strategic governance level, we're dealing with a bunch of amateurs who cannot run a big company here.
I'm not sure that's my take-home message.
That is what you said, but let's...
It is, but it's not the primary message.
But I would tend to agree with that. And that's, of course, a serious problem when we have something of very strategic meaning that they cannot deal with it. So it's a serious problem. Then the second problem is, as you was provoked here, is that actually there is not really a clear incentive for the academics. That is a serious problem, and I don't think it's being addressed enough. And then I would add a third from this, that is, well, isn't that because the public sector, universities, just are not competent to make software? And they never have been, and they probably never will be.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think those first 2 points that you just made are actually related to one another. The people running institutions need to look after the institution. That is their primary responsibility. So to change the academic reward system is very, very tricky. It's something that is international.
But isn't it strategic management of the university?
No, but this would be the strategic management of the university, right? So if you're saying, okay, strategically we're going to move towards a more open environment, so we're going to try and reward our researchers in an open way. But what that potentially does is you potentially reduces their ability to play the current game. So they may lose in the current environment, which means that the university's reputation may also drop in the current environment. Everyone's perfectly reasonably frightened to go out alone. And this is why institutions do need to step up, but I don't think they can be the drivers of the change, because the change needs to come from above, and that comes back to the funder question, that funders are the ones who really, they hold the purse strings, and that's what, the two things that matter in an academic environment, like in terms of institutions, is reputation and cash. The idea of the greater good and stuff is all very nice, but on a practical level, you've got to get money through the door, and the way you get money through the door is through your reputation. So you're not going to put that at risk at the expense of going out alone when everybody else is going, oh, but we quite like the status quo. It's really, really tricky. And so I have every empathy for the decisions these people are making. It's frustrating, but I understand where they're coming from. On the we don't have the capacity, the university administration might not have the capacity, but surely we have, I don't know, the odd computer scientist floating around in the odd university. It's not like we don't have skill sets. We could potentially. I mean, where do you think all the people who developed this stuff came from? They came from universities. So we could, if we wanted to, do something about this, but it would require investment and will across institutions that may see each other as rivals. That's potentially the problem.
Open infrastructure costs money. Yeah. Okay, Danny, thank you very much.
Thank you.